Quick tips don't produce real transformation. People who say that aren't wrong. Real change comes from doing something consistently over time. A tip you found on YouTube isn't going to do that by itself. But I don't think that makes quick tips useless. In fact, you're about to see a bunch of them on this channel. Before we go any further, I want you to do something different with the next tip you come across, including anything I give you. Don't try it. Test it. Those are two different things. And that difference is why a lot of good advice never goes anywhere. Let me show you what I mean. Across my career, one pattern keeps showing up. People skills shape long-term success. I've seen it in high-stakes technical work, leadership, business, and family life. This channel is about solving the people puzzle. I want to talk about something that bothers me about the self-improvement space, and I say this as someone who is actively adding to it. There are two camps, and they're both partially right. The first camp says, real growth takes sustained effort over time. You can't shortcut your way to being a better communicator, a better leader, a better version of yourself. Tips and hacks are shallow. They don't stick. They don't change you. The second camp says, I have a problem right now. I need something I can use today. I don't have months to develop a new skill from the ground up when the meeting I'm dreading is tomorrow morning. Both of these are true, and they're not actually in conflict. They're describing different needs at different points in the process. The mistake isn't using tips. The mistake is treating a tip as the destination when it's actually the starting point. Here's what typically happens when someone comes across a useful tip. In a video, in a newsletter, a conversation with a colleague. You hear it. You make a quick judgment. That might be useful. If you're organized about it, you write it down. Maybe it goes into a notes app, a journal, a bookmarked video, and then it sits there in a pile with every other tip you've decided might be useful someday. I've done this. I have notes going back years with things like try mirroring in conversations or pause before responding when you're defensive. Good observations, useful techniques. And for a long time, most of them went nowhere because capturing a tip and using a tip are completely different activities. The pile of tips is like a toolbox where everything's been thrown in loose. You know there's something in there that could help, but when the moment comes, you don't reach for it. You react on instinct, the same way you always have. Part of the problem is selection. Not every tip works for every person in every context. When someone distills their experience or their research into a short piece of advice, they're necessarily stripping out the specifics. Their particular situation, their personality, the relationships they were navigating. You get the conclusion without the conditions, which means the tip may fit you well, or it may fit you poorly, and you won't know until you've actually tested it against your real life. And that gets to the deeper issue. There's a ladder here, and tips are only the first rung. A tip that you've genuinely tested, that you know works for you in your context, is worth the effort of building into a habit. A habit repeated consistently over time starts to change your default behavior. And changed default behavior is what transformation actually looks like from the inside. But you can't climb that ladder if you stop at the first rung. Collecting tips without testing them is like buying running shoes and calling it training. I want to introduce a distinction that reframed how I think about this. There's a concept in learning theory called single loop versus double loop learning. Single loop learning is when you try something, see if it works, and adjust. You're operating within your existing assumptions. You're asking, did this work? Double loop learning goes a level deeper. You're not just asking whether the tactic worked, you're asking why it worked or didn't, and what that tells you about your assumptions and what you'd want to do differently. You're not just adjusting your behavior, you're potentially adjusting your understanding. Most people who try a quick tip are doing single loop at best. They try it once, it feels awkward, they conclude it doesn't work, and they move on. Or it feels okay, they do it a few more times, it fades, and they forget about it. Either way, they've learned almost nothing useful. When you treat a tip as an experiment instead, you shift into double loop territory. You're not just executing the tip. You're gathering data about yourself. Why did this feel hard? Was it the technique or was it the context? Did it produce a different outcome or did I not notice because I wasn't watching for it? This matters, especially if you're starting from somewhere near zero on a skill. One of the things the research on self-efficacy makes clear is that small wins are disproportionately valuable early on. Not because they transform you, but because they build your belief that change is possible. When you've never successfully navigated a hard conversation, one conversation that goes slightly better than expected isn't nothing. It's evidence. It's the first data point that tells you the skill is acquirable. And here's the shift I find most useful. When an experiment doesn't go well, it stops being a personal failure and becomes a finding. The tip didn't fail you. The tip didn't fit this context. Those are very different conclusions. Let me give you a concrete example. A few months ago, I was trying to get my exercise routine unstuck. I came across a tip I'd seen in various forms. Work out first thing in the morning, before anything else has a chance to get in the way. Made sense on paper. I designed an experiment around it. Wake up at 7 a.m. every morning for a week and do a short workout before starting my day. 2 days in, I was done. Turns out I need to build energy gradually in the morning. Forcing physical effort first thing doesn't work for me in this season of life. That's not a failure. That's a finding. I learned something specific about myself that the tip, as I received it, couldn't have told me. And because I was treating it as an experiment rather than an instruction, I wasn't left with, I guess I'm not a morning workout person and I never will be. I was left with a much more useful question. If the timing is the problem, what timing would actually work? That reflection led me to experiment 2. Instead of a fixed workout time, I added 2 questions to my daily planning template. What exercise is planned for today and what exercise actually happened today? 7 days later, 7 for 7. It worked so well I forgot I was running an experiment. It's just how I plan now. That second idea didn't come from a tip. It came from paying attention to what the first experiment taught me. That's the difference between trying a tip and testing one. So how do you get started? This doesn't need to be complicated. Here's the process I use. Step 1. When you encounter a tip, don't just capture it, interrogate it a little. Before you file it away, spend 2 minutes with 3 questions. What problem do I have that this tip could address? How hard would it realistically be for me to put this into practice? And when, specifically in the next week or 2, would I actually use it? If you can't answer these questions, the tip isn't ready to experiment with yet. Either the problem isn't real enough, the tip isn't specific enough, or the timing isn't right. That's useful to know. Capture all of this along with the tip when you add it to your notes and then set it aside consciously rather than letting it get lost in the pile. If you can answer them, you've just written your research question. You know what you're testing, you know what conditions you're testing it under, and you have a rough idea of when you'll get your first data point. Step 2. Design a small series of experiments. Not one try, a series. Aim for 3 to 5. Each one takes the form, I will do this specific thing in this specific situation for a defined period of time. The reason you want multiple experiments is that the first one is almost never clean. You're unfamiliar with the technique, the conditions vary, you might not have been watching closely for the right things. Each subsequent experiment is informed by the one before it. You adjust. You narrow the conditions or broaden them. You try a variation. This is how you moved from, I tried it and it felt weird, to, I've learned something about how this works for me. It's fine, it's actually good to modify your experiments as you go. That's not failing to stick to the plan, that's the plan working. Step 3. When you're done, look at what you found. 2 questions. Did this tip ultimately provide me any value in my situation? And if it did, what do I know now about how to use it that would help me start building it into a habit? If the answer to the first question is no, you haven't wasted your time. You've efficiently ruled something out. That's a legitimate outcome. Not everything will fit, and knowing what doesn't fit is as useful as knowing what does. Now you know what kind of tips to keep an eye out for that will help you. If the answer is yes, you now have something worth investing in. You know it works. You know roughly how and when to use it. You have a foundation to build a habit on, which is a very different starting point than, I heard this was useful and I'm going to try to remember to do it. The reason transformation feels overwhelming to a lot of people isn't that they're not capable of it. It's that they're trying to take on too much at once. Change your whole approach to a conflict. Rebuild how you give feedback. Transform your relationship to your work. All of it, all at once, starting from nothing. That's not a plan, that's an invitation to freeze. Tips, tested well, give you a different entry point. They're low commitment, low friction ways to start moving in a direction before you've decided to commit to the journey. And occasionally, not always, but occasionally, one of them turns out to be the thing that cracks something wide open for you. The experiment reframe does something else too. When a tip doesn't work for you, that's not failure. It's not evidence that you can't change or that the advice was bad. It's information. It tells you something about your context, your working style, your circumstances. The goal shifts from trying to execute a tip correctly to understanding yourself more clearly. And that understanding is what actually feeds long-term growth. Tips that have been tested and proven are worth building into habits. Habits are worth the sustained effort to internalize. And internalized behavior, the stuff that becomes part of how you naturally operate, that's where transformation lives. You don't have to decide right now whether you're committed to the whole ladder. You just have to decide whether a specific tip is worth a few small, honest experiments. That's a much easier decision, and it's a much more productive one. If this framing is useful to you, I'd encourage you to keep it in mind as you watch the quick tips videos coming up on this channel. Each one is worth treating as a hypothesis, not a prescription. If you want to go deeper on any of this, or if you want to share what you found through your own experiments, I'd enjoy that conversation. Let's take it up in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, now's a great time. There's more coming.